welcome, fellow bookworms and film fans. Welcome to this week's episode of The Contented Narrative, where we'll be looking at The Witches by Roald Dahl. Now, it was released in 1983 and it was then adapted to screen in 1990. Now, I'll be looking at four things as usual: how good is the film, how good is the book, how good is the plot, and overall, how good is it? Now, obviously, I will be discussing the book and the film in its entirety, so there will be spoilers in this episode, so do bear that in mind. Now, the film. So the film scared the hell out of me as a kid. You know, obviously now I'm older, I'm kind of like, it's not that scary. But I mean, the Grand High Witch was the stuff of nightmares. She took off her face, for crying out loud. But honestly, as I'm watching it as I'm older, it's such a funny film. So I really enjoy the story. It's so strange. And Luke, the little boy, is so accepting of becoming a mouse. I mean, bless him, he's such a sweetheart. The acting is a bit over the top at times, and obviously if you watch the film, you'll understand what I mean when I say Bruno. Like, the kid that plays Bruno, he's like, British accent is like, oh, hello, how am I? Like, it's just hilarious. And honestly, I love the fact that the child just gets on and does it, and it's like, this is the plan. Grandmama, don't worry, I'm a mouse forever, but let's just get over it. And I love the fact that this is the case in all Roald Dahl, films, in all Roald Dahl books that gets transferred onto films, is the kid is the one that kind of goes, all right, stop crying, let's do it now. So, the fact that as well that this film had two endings. So it had the happy ending where he turns back into a human, but then he also had the original ending with the mouse. And Roald Dahl actually got really annoyed that they released the film originally, like they released the film with the happy ending with him becoming a human, because that's not, that's not kind of what happens at the end. But I would probably say, don't let little ones watch it, but this film is a good film and I do enjoy it, and it'll get a 7 out of 10 for me. Now, the book, of course, with the Roald Dahl book, it is always a good read. It's always a quick read and it's always an easy read. And I always love how the main character is a child who acts in very adult ways. And, they're the ones that kind of carry the story. The story probably set out a whole generation of us searching for witches among the women in their lives, trying to see if they were itching their scalp, if they had a wig on, were they wearing gloves when it was hot, and so on and so forth. And as a story, I can honestly imagine reading it to my kids in the future. And even, to be fair, reading it as an adult, it's just an enjoyable story. It's just an enjoyable plot. And, it takes a couple of hours to read. So, honestly, it gets an 8 out of 10 for me. And I would definitely recommend this to children, adults, basically anybody. Now, the plot. So, the plot I noticed was very similar. So it starts out with the grandma in Norway telling Luke all about witches and how to spot them. So, they have square feet, so they have to, they have very uncomfortable shoes, and they've got like long claws, so they've always got to wear gloves, and they're bald completely, so they wear wigs and things like that. And, they've got enlarged nostrils so they can smell kids, and it's just little things like that. And she kind of tells them all these stories. Unfortunately, Luke's parents die in an automobile accident. So Grandmama gets custody of Luke. Now, they end up travelling back to England so that Luke can continue in his English school, even though, his grandma doesn't want to leave Norway in the slightest. But that's what the last will and testament of the parents said, was you need to basically move back to England, And so that's what she did. Now they're in England. Luke has his first encounter with a witch. She tries to trick him into jumping down out of the tree where he's building a tree house, but he isn't fooled, because he knows what witches are like. And so, he runs back in and he goes, oh, grandmama, blah, blah, blah. And his grandma's like, oh, you got lucky, son. And it's like, I love how that's just a normal thing. Yeah, you got lucky, you're no longer captured by a witch. Then grandmama falls ill. Now, in the book, it's slightly different. So in the book, it's pneumonia. In the film, it's diabetes. So anyway, instead of going back to Norway, where they were originally going to go for the summer holidays, they end up going to a nice little seaside resort. It's Bournemouth in the book, but it's not really mentioned in the film where they end up. So they end up going to this really lovely little seaside resort. And then, because Luke gets mice for his birthday, and he's trying to teach these mice, like, tricks and things. And this maid runs in and sees these mice and runs out screaming. So they come to an agreement with the manager that the mice will only be kept in the cage in the room. Obviously, Luke wants to train them, so he goes off to try and find somewhere to train them. So when he, goes off exploring, he finds a nice big room, and it's the meeting room where, all the witches of England will eventually be walking into. He doesn't know this, however, so he hides behind his little partition and starts like training his mice how to walk a trip rope and everything like that. And as he's training his mice, all the witches walk in. Luckily, he's hidden. And because witches can smell little boys and girls who have recently washed, because apparently it's a stronger smell for them, he's mucky and dirty, so they can't really smell him that well. Lovely. And then you get the Grand High Witch revealing what she looks like, and all of the rest of the witches reveal themselves as well. Which, as I said, as a kid, scared me. As an adult, I'm just like, oh, that's good, like, makeup there. So anyway, the Grand High Witch then demands to the witches of England that they destroy all the children all at once. And obviously one of these witches stands up and goes, that's not possible. Which it's not. You can't, like, there's children being born all the time. But anyway, so the Grand High Witch turns around and basically eviscerates this witch. And everyone's like, oh, don't mess with her. So the Grand High Witch then outlines her plan. So the witches will go home. They'll immediately resign from their jobs. Then they will go and buy the very, very best of sweet shops. They will then announce a grand opening, and they will then give away free sweets and chocolates to the children of England. But these are contaminated with a formula. The contamination is a drop of elixir that turns the person who tastes it into a mouse, but it's delayed. So in the film, it's delayed by like 2 hours, but in the book, they're like, I've set the clock, stopwatch, whatever it is, to 9 o'clock the next morning. And I'm like, ooh, okay. But yeah, so in the book, the Grand High Witch gives the full recipe to the witches for the formula, but in the film, she has all the bottles already prepared. But she does say to any of the like ancient witches that she will give them the formula. So she's made a couple of bottles for people that can't climb trees or like run something down to catch another ingredient. She's already got the ingredients for them. So then enter the test subject, Bruno Jenkins, the lovely little English kid who just won't stop eating, because he's already been given some of this formula. And then he becomes a mouse right in front of everybody's eyes and runs off into the corners of the room. Now at this point, the meeting is then over. And Luke gets ousted. So, you know, he's sort of like, he sat there and then suddenly someone goes, I can smell a child, basically, you know, calm down, hocus pocus. Now in the film, there's a chase like all over the hotel and the grounds, and there's this scene, which honestly, I still don't know why it's in the film, where the Grand High Witch sees this baby and the mum's like fast asleep next to this baby on this bench, and this baby's on the top of this cliff. And she just pushes the pram, and the pram goes tumbling down this hillside, like basically towards the sea, and you just sat there going, oh damn, like I can't believe she just did that. So then Luke runs out, stops the baby from dying and everything, and you know, he eventually gets captured by the witches, and he gets turned into a mouse himself as well. So Mouse Luke now finds Mouse Bruno, and the two of them then go off to consult with Grandmama. So when they get to his grandma's room, Luke explains everything that's happened, and he's like, I'm okay, Grandma, don't worry, I'm fine. You know, this is what's happened, we need to stop them. Again, really upset, like really understanding of his situation. So anyway, Luke then comes up with a plan to use the formula on the witches when they're having their dinner to turn them all into little mices. Oh yes. So then Luke goes into the Grand High Witch's bedroom and steals a bottle so that he can then turn them all into mice. So Grandmama then goes and tries to reunite Mouse Bruno with his parents, and it doesn't really go well. Like his parent, like, also you got to think, like if you were in like this really nice seaside resort and a baddie old woman came up and was like, your son is a mouse and he's in my handbag, would you be like, oh yeah, no, 100%, yeah, that's my son? Like, you honestly wouldn't. So I don't know what you think was gonna happen, but obviously it didn't go well. Like, you know, the dad goes off screaming, being like, you're a crazy old woman. The mum screaming because she hates mice, and you just sat there being like, I don't see how you saw this going any differently from the way that it did. Anyway, so then you sort of like get the whole plan, you know, and Luke then runs into the kitchen, and then stroke of luck, he realizes that all the witches are having soup. So he manages to throw the soup, the magic formula, into the soup so that it can then go out and all the witches can eat it. Then he's sort of like swinging around and happy that, you know, he's done it, and he gets caught by the chefs. A part of his tail gets chopped off with a carving knife, And then he ends up sort of like running up the chef's trousers as well at one point, and then running back off again. But anyway, so the formula is in, the soup is being ate, the scene is set. So then you kind of get all these witches that are transforming into mice in the very dining room, and then obviously like the manager, the chefs and everything are coming out and basically killing them all, and you know, making sure that none of them escape. So obviously you know that these witches are now dead. So is the Grand High Witch. She's gone. So then when that's happening, Grandmama goes over again and is like, right, this really is your son, and puts this like fat little mouse Bruno on, and Bruno finally speaks up. It's like, hello mother, hello father, it's me, Bruno. And I'm just like, oh dear God. And obviously the dad's like, okay, right, let's roll with this. And the mum's like, I hate mice. And I'm just like, your son's a mouse. Honestly, it's so bizarre. But anyway, so then the formula works, all the witches have become mice, and you know, but then Luke then runs off, and in the film, he runs off and he puts like a little luggage tag for their address on a suitcase filled with money and filled with a little black book filled with names of all the witches in all the different countries, and especially in America. So then obviously this arrives at their house. Luke's like, oh no, I'm alright, Grandmama, I'm a mouse forever. So he's, you know, running around and everything. He's like, now we can go off to America. We've got all the names. We can now go off and get rid of all these witches. And then this lovely little white witch who was basically being like undertrod throughout the film. She's not even in the book, but throughout the film she's being undertrod by the Grand High Witch. Like she's being basically pushed to one side. Then decides to turn Luke back into a boy, and goes off and turns Bruno, I'm guessing, back into a boy. And that's how the kind of the film ends. The book ends, however, with them going back to Norway, and he remains a mouse forever, basically. And then they start compromising a plan to go to the castle in Norway where the Grand High Witch supposedly lives. What are the chances? And destroying all of those witches, and then basically going out and destroying all the rest of the witches, because they realise that mice only live like not that many years, so he won't have a full life. And he basically turns around at one point and is like, why, I don't want to be alive if you're not alive, Grandma, so I'm glad that I'm only living as long as you are. And I'm like, you're like a 10-year-old boy, and he's happy with like just an extra, you know, 5-6 years on his life. It just baffles me. But anyway, so that's kind of how the book ends. Now the plot is so incredibly close, like it's pretty much word for word in points. You know, the fact that they start off in Norway, they go to England, then they kind of go to the seaside, and then, you know, and apart from the ending, which I know Roald Dahl was really upset about, him becoming a human again, I think it was actually quite a nice happy ending in the book as well, because Roald Dahl's, their endings aren't normally the endings that you think about. But honestly, it was pretty much spot on. So apart from the fact that obviously the film added this like this underling witch that then becomes a white witch at the end, and you know, obviously changed the ending of the film itself, so it gets an 8 out of 10 for plot for me. Now overall the characters were very much spot on with how they were portrayed, how they played the encompassing roles, you know, like how apart from in the book the Grand High Witch is described as being quite small, very pretty but very small, and obviously the film Angelica Houston, oh, I mean, her as Morticia Addams is phenomenal, but her as a Grand High Witch as well, she's just brilliant. She's got like goth down to a T. But yes, apart from that, but pretty much everything else is exactly the same. And so honestly, as I said, in parts, it's almost word for word. Like what they say in the book is exactly what they say in the film. So it gets a 9 out of 10 for me overall. Now, obviously, this is my own opinion. I'm happy if you agree or disagree with anything that I've said. Do leave it below in the comments. Don't forget to click subscribe to be alerted for any new episodes that are coming out. And obviously, don't forget to always remember to keep it contento.